And welcome to Primetime Health's new show, hosted by Steve Shank. It's Not Your Fault. I'm Kim Power-Stilson, and I'm here today with Steve Shank to talk about the new show that will be coming up every single Tuesday right here on Utah Valley Live and KHQN 1480 AM. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Kim.
Now, Steve, you are a food industry expert. You have been in the industry for 30 years. You have changed the way people can store foods that are gourmet and healthy and good for you. You're feeding and prospering American families, and you have a new book coming out called It's Not Your Fault. Tell us about that.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I've spent a lot of years in the field, in sales, generally working with a lot of people. And it's kind of interesting, Kim, that people generally don't, at least I don't learn from success and when things are doing well. The only way that I particularly learn is by getting a 2x4 across the forehead, and then I have to stop and think. Because the two things that people hate more in life than anything else is to think and decide. And the reason I know that is because if you take all of the flaws of the human race, I've got them all wrapped up into a little bundle in my head, and I'm like a walking flaw catalog. So that's how I can analyze all this stuff and figure out. There's a principle that I wrote about a little while ago that was kind of interesting. You've heard the thing that necessity is the mother of invention?
Yes.
Well, actually, terror is the father of pure inspiration, and that's how I learned a lot of things in my life. And I've been around the Johnson's barn a couple times here, and so that's where this came from. But
now you're a farmer's son, is that right?
Yeah, I am. In fact, I come from a very interesting family. My dad was 62 when I was born.
Go Dad.
Go Dad. Yeah. Well, there's some comments about guys like that, but be that as it may, the fact is that we never recognized age in the family, and at this point in my life, I'm glad. It's a real good thing we didn't recognize age, okay? Yeah. So anyway, I was raised on a farm up in Minnesota with all the Swedes and Norwegians, and you learn a lot about just how to be. You learn that if it is to be, it's up to me. You've heard that old thing. And when the hay rake breaks, you can't just sit back and say, gee, I don't know how to fix that thing, and I don't know what to do with it. And so what you do is you get out a wrench and you beat on that sucker until you get it put back together, and you start raking hay again. And this has worked well for me throughout my life. And when I got involved with sales, I discovered that there's a difference between a con man and a salesman, which is kind of interesting. They both are able to help people see as they see, feel as they feel, think as they think, and act as they want them to act. But the difference between the two is that the salesman wants them to act in the light of their own self-betterment. But the con man wants them to act in the light of his own self-betterment. So what I'm getting at with the whole point is that in going through working with people, I discovered that people are really tied up in knots over relationships and over where their life is, and a lot of people are in denial of responsibility for what their situation is. I've hired salesman after salesman that come in, and the market stinks, the people are no good, and the product stinks, and the pricing is wrong, and everything is wrong outside of them. But after they work with dozens and dozens of people and work with a product that's really good, what they really should discover actually is that the common denominator of failure is not the product, not the people, not the market. It's moi. It's them. It gets back to them. And so, oddly enough, I've thought a lot about this, and I've had the 2x4 across the forehead quite a few times. You can probably tell. But anyway, the fact is that in going through this and some trauma in my life, I've put some things together that I haven't seen before, some principles that kind of work, and I discovered that the most important thing in most relationships, any argument, in failed marriages, in lying and cheating and working with just all of the things that are the problems that people have in life. It all comes down to how they feel about themselves and a tremendous amount of guilt connected with how they feel about themselves and what they do. And so I started working with that, thinking about it, and in the process of my own, inner workings, trying to figure out why things weren't working in my life. In other words, I was starving because I wasn't making any sales and that type of thing. I discovered that really we have tremendous control. We have tremendous power within ourselves. And I've got a stack of self-help books and basically personal development books, probably about 5.5 feet high, and they're all dog-eared and underlined. And if I could remember everything in those, I'd be much more successful than I am. But the fact is that I learned enough so that I could figure out how not to be a victim. Because victims really do have big butts. And it comes like, I could have made the team, but the coach didn't like me. I could have made the audition, but I could have been successful, but my husband wouldn't let me. I could have done this, but my wife wouldn't let me. I woulda, coulda, shoulda, but something outside prevented it. And oddly enough, it's not true. We live basically a denial form of lie in our lives. And if we realize the magnificence of the human being, the fact that we have all the answers, and if we can just discover simple principles, like one of them that I learned about was interesting. It's called the past doesn't exist. You can have an automobile accident. They could drive right in this door and run into the front of this desk. And tomorrow morning, after it was all cleaned up, there's no car, the desk is bashed up, but they put a patch on that sucker, and then you're good.
But Kent would be really mad.
But Kent would be really mad. But the fact is that the past doesn't exist. That accident is over with.
That's a great point.
So if you have any culpability or responsibility in what happened in that accident, what you deal with is, wait a minute, it doesn't exist. I've got to deal with the here and now. But an awful lot of people do what happened in the scriptures when people were repenting. They'd thump on their chest and beat themselves up because everything, they were a sinner and they were terrible and they were bad. And we find that in modern life, I go around and I meet tremendous numbers of families as a result of being in the field selling for a long time, and now with people calling in and working with us on shipping product all over the country. People are beating themselves up that don't need to. And there are some basic principles that we'll be talking about in these discussions that are just kind of fun. For example, one of the things is to know me is to love me. And I know when you're looking at me, you know me, Kim, well enough to know that that's really kind of a challenge in my case. But in most people's cases, if you lock yourself in the room with somebody that you really don't care much about, but you find out who they are, what they like, what they're afraid of, what they love, what they want to be, what their hopes are, what their dreams are, what their fears are. Once you get inside somebody's head, all of a sudden you can't help but like them. And I know that a lot of the folks that are viewing have a tendency toward Christianity, and any of the other religions will have this same concept, and that is that when a master visits someone or talks to someone, people who have met significant individuals in their lifetime have felt like that person almost instantly knew them.
Yes.
Well, what happens is that these people have a sensitivity toward another individual such that they can sense the fears, the worries, the concerns. And after you've been around this old rock for a period of time, you get to the point, if you're sensitive to it, to where you can kind of feel where they're uncomfortable, where they are comfortable, and what they like and what they don't like. And as you get to know these things, you get to really like that person. I believe, we've got some axe murderers out there that I think that this probably doesn't apply to, but for the average soul that is saying, I just want to be happy, I just want to be liked, I want to belong, I want to be part of something where I can feel loved and cared about, and love and care about others that I like, it doesn't take much for them to get that feeling about them across to you. And that's how friends are made. That's how long-term relationships are made. There's some other principles that are kind of interesting. One,
well,
yes, ma'am.
Before you go to that, let me ask you a little. You mentioned your success in sales, and there was a time in your life when you didn't have those sales, so you searched for answers, and those are some of the answers you're sharing in your book. Tell us a little bit about your background. We said you're a food expert. You're in the food industry. You've been doing this for 30 some odd years. You created a solution that will help feed and prosper American families. And I know that your book's not about that, but it's part of your journey. So can you tell us a little bit about that part of your journey?
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. There are 4 pieces to every human being. There's the spiritual, the mental, the emotional, and the physical. And we kind of work at things backwards, most of us do. But I've been working with putting together food storage programs for a long time. And then it got to the point where just a couple years ago, we kind of almost moved the entire industry toward enabling people to feed their families and to work with them. But in working with a lot of families out there, I learned about some of these feelings and these stresses and the concerns that they have for just making things happen. And the reason that the name of the book is It's Not Your Fault is that if people can eliminate just the guilt in their life, the guilt is what stops them from recognizing, hey, it is up to me. We spend so much time saying, it's not my fault, I didn't fail, I didn't mess up, and I spent a lot of time in the field doing that. I remember one time I was driving home from Frankfort, Indiana, where I was selling
pre-need cemetery property.
Oh, scary voice. That was great.
But anyway.
So you've been selling all your life. So before food, you sold other things.
Yeah, and before the food, I sold my wife on marrying me. So I mean, hey, that was the best sale.
Yeah, then you knew you were good, right?
Yeah. Then I knew I could do anything, but then I found out that I couldn't. But that's okay. But I was screaming and hollering and speaking a lot of German. My family is German, and we used to cuss a lot. And I was speaking German all the way down, and Sherry happened to be riding with me. And I was talking about how the market was terrible and the people were stupid and nobody could sell this stuff. And it was probably true, but I didn't know any better. But the fact is that she stopped. She said, "Stop!" I won't say exactly what she said, but she said, kind of shut the up. But anyway, do you want to be a salesman? And I said, well, I don't know. She said, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you do for a living, but just decide. And you see, that was a lesson to me. One of the most important things that people don't do in their life in trying to become whatever it is that they hope to become is that they never just actually decide. And I mulled that over and I said, okay. And she said, but wait a minute. Once you decide, there's absolutely no turning back. I can't stand it. And she couldn't. I can't stand it when someone makes a decision and then undecides, and then decides and undecides, and then decides. And I learned later, much later, probably about 20 years later, that what that really means is that the actual decision, the decision that you make when you set an objective or a goal, deciding who you're going to marry, deciding is the literal creation of that which you've decided on. It's the spiritual creation of whatever it is you've decided. If you decide you're going to have a business, if you decide you're going to be successful in sales, if you decide to be an attorney, if you decide to be a doctor, if you decide to marry that woman, You know, the fact is, the decision is the creation. But here's the problem. The problem is that people oftentimes undecide again, and then they decide, and then they undecide, and then they undecide. And what, if the decision is the creation, then what is undeciding? It's the uncreation. And the interesting fact is that everybody does it. Everybody decides and undecides, decides and undecides, and they say that a leader makes a decision quickly and changes his mind very slowly, and a follower makes a decision or makes up his mind very slowly and changes his mind at the drop of a hat. Well, it's very true, but if you think about it, realizing that everybody has these characteristics, is it possible that the people who are successful just simply create a little bit more than they uncreate? They decide and don't quite undecide as much as the folks that aren't as successful as they'd like to be. So that lesson that she taught me in deciding has been extremely valuable, because it wasn't up to the people out there. It wasn't up to the market and the product and the pricing and all of this external stuff. The beautiful thing, the glorious, magnificent, beautiful thing is that I have within my being the power to decide, and that creates whatever I've decided on.
Wow, Steve, that sets into perspective probably many of the decisions we've cast. To those of you listening on KHQN 1480 AM and watching on Utah Valley Live, again, this is Steve Shank. He's talking about his life experiences that led to eventually deciding to write the book, It's Not Your Fault, which will be out at the end of the summer. But here, this show will be a show that you can listen to every single Tuesday right here on Utah Valley Live and get to hear piece by piece words of wisdom like this. Now, Steve, we have to go to commercial break, so if we're all set here to go to break, we're going to go do a little station ID, then we'll be back with more of Steve Shank and more about his words of wisdom and deciding and actually sticking with your decision, perhaps.
And then I'll give you a definition for an expert, which you just called me, after the break.
After the break. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with more. Again, Steve Shank, Kim Power Stilson, live on Utah Valley Live and KHQN 1480 AM. We'll be right back.
In business since 1980, RIMS has served Utah property owners and condominium associations for nearly 3 decades. Today, RIMS stands as one of Utah's largest and most reputable management firms. Whether your property is large or small, a homeowners association or an individual condominium, an apartment community or a single-family home, a student housing complex, or an office or retail center, RIMS will provide all the necessary management and maintenance expertise you need to achieve your goals without sacrificing any of the personal and responsive care you expect from your property management company. Call 801-375-5595. Looking to rent a property that RIMS manages? Go to remsinc.com or call 801-375-5595.
Hi, I'm Roger Strong. I'm here to tell you about Tidbits of Utah County. No death, divorce, devastation, or destruction, just good news for good people. You'll find us everywhere in Utah Valley, in doctors' offices, restaurants, mechanic shops, anywhere that people wait. We have over 35 features of fun, family-friendly entertainment. To find a paper or to advertise, call Roger at 801-616-6288. Again, that's Roger at 801-616-6288. We're Tidbits of Utah County, the happy paper for Happy Valley.
And welcome back to Prime Time Health's new show, It's Not Your Fault. I'm here with Steve Shank, who's the author of It's Not Your Fault. My name is Kim Power Stilson, and we're hosting live right here on KHQN 1480 AM and UtahValleyLive.com. Thanks for joining us. Again, Steve, we were talking about, before the break, about, like you said, I called you an expert. We're talking about decisions that are part of your journey that led to your book, It's Not Your Fault, and what the show will be about every single week.
Yeah, you said you're back live. Live is relative, you know that, don't you? But anyway,
You pretty much sound and look very alive to me. So whenever you're watching this, it was live in the studio.
Very good. I told you that I'd give you some definitions as expert. You called me that. And that's kind of an uncomfortable name for me, or a term for me, because I haven't found too many experts that are really experts. They're people that just haven't found their place. But one of the definitions is someone 50 miles from home with a briefcase. The unfortunate thing is that I'm not quite 50 miles from home because I live in South Jordan.
In Utah.
The other one is a drip under pressure, so that's the one I'm going to have to deal with. So anyway, I couldn't resist. I don't
You
know.
have a great sense of humor.
That
I love
stuff just kind of builds up the pressure, and I have to just release it sometime. Unfortunately, you're in the way of it. But
well, I have to throw this in about Steve Shank. You can find him on Facebook at Steve Shank, and you can find his blog at steveshank.me, and soon the book about the book, It's Not Your Fault.me. What the fun thing about you is on your Facebook site, every so often you will post these crazy, outrageous quotes or statements, and they are just so funny. And also, Steve Shank is known for having these great cowboy boots, and if they come up on the desk, you know he has something profound to say. Is that from being a farmer's son?
Yeah, that comes from the farm. The reason I lift my boots up when I'm going to say something, Kim says it's profound, but really I'm just trying to keep the boots clean. And the other thing, a lot of times when I'm talking, you need to save your watches. It's okay. I'm sorry. That was indelicate, I guess. But anyway, no, the fascinating thing about my path is that I discovered in working with people that they were all struggling with the same things that I was. But denial of responsibility for everything that happens to you is getting in the way, and the guilt about what hasn't been done. If it's not your fault, then you don't have to worry about the guilt. And here's an interesting thought. The concept of it's not your fault is kind of fun, because if you think about it, a lot of times the things that you call your fault are things that have happened in the past where you did something that you now look at as stupid. But here's a principle you can absolutely live by. Nobody, even your teenage kids, never does anything intentionally stupid. It's really true.
I don't know.
No, wait a minute, you got to listen to me. What happens is that we do something, and then we look back at it and we say, boy, that was really stupid. I will never do that again. But at the time, if you thought it was stupid for whatever reason, if you thought it was stupid because that girl that you were trying to date as a guy, not you. Anyway, that girl, would think that was cool, and you fell and broke your leg, and you really look stupid and say, I don't want to do that again. Well, at the time, it wasn't stupid. Think about anything that you've ever done in your life or experienced in your life, and look back at it, and if it was really dorky, dumb, ridiculous, made you feel foolish, at the time, it was the best choice you could make. So, in retrospect, yeah, it was stupid, and it was your fault. You made the decision, but it wasn't intentionally stupid. So, was it your fault?
No.
So, what you do is you fix it. You go and fix whatever it was, apologize, pay it back, or do whatever it was. And if you take care of it and then learn from that experience and say, I ain't never going to do that again, and you don't do it, then you have, in religious terms, repented.
And you're pretty smart, too.
Yeah, you've learned something, and you've repented. And then if you beat yourself up over it, it's a little bit stupid. That's the stupid thing. Taking fault for it after you've said, yep, it was dumb. Didn't do it intentionally, stupid, but in retrospect, it was the dumbest thing in the world I could have done. Made a fool of myself. I'll be embarrassed in front of her for the rest of my life. But anyway, but in terms of...
Sounds like you've been there.
Well, that was cheap. Oh. But anyway, so was it your fault? In retrospect, you look at it and say, no, it wasn't. Now, if you look back at it and you say, that was really stupid, you find yourself in the same situation again, and you do the same thing again, then it's stupid, and it is your fault. You got it. It's all yours. You can own it. You can hang it around your neck like a stinking albatross. And so there you go. So that's where the title of the book comes from. As you go through all of these situations and all of these learning, what it is it's a repartee between a guy by the name of the Guardian. That's kind of he's kind of a
so this is in your book.
Yeah, this is in the book. The Guardian's kind of a semi-angel guru, all-knowing teacher type of whatever. And there's a introduction where the Guardian actually speaks to you and tells you that, you better sit down, hang out, and shut up, and you're in for a ride, and it's the humble teacher, your Guardian. And the guy that he's talking to is a guy by the name of Michael, which is a common name that's used for every man in just about every kind of a scenario that you got. So I picked up Michael to work with it. But it's talking back and forth between these hang-ups that Michael has and all the guilt and all the things he has to deal with. But here's another interesting principle that'll be kind of fun for those of you sitting out here listening to this goofiness for the first time. There's a law. If you've ever had anybody really mad at you and really just raising Cain and just angry or judgmental of you or of a situation that they're in, here's something that we will prove in the next few programs that you listen to. This is a law. It's absolutely irrefutable. I can defend it in any situation. I'll take a challenge from anybody on this. Anytime you see anger or judgmentalism of you or anybody else, from that individual that you're receiving it, you are always, every time, forever, looking into the eyes of guilt. Interesting thought. Think about that. Not going to tell you about it, but you're going to have to listen and you're going to have to view this program, because that's one that is going to be so fun for you, it's unbelievable. When Melvin comes stomping into the room and he's really ticked off and he's yelling and screaming and hollering and raising Cain with you, you know that something has either slapped him in the agency or the freedom to choose, or kicked him right in the guilt.
Either or.
Either or. Doesn't matter if he's angry or judgmental. Now think of all the judgmental people in your life. And think of the people that you have been accountable to and that have felt like they could evaluate what you did and how they don't think that you are what you ought to be. And think about this. Anytime you see judgmentalism, you're always looking into the eyes of the guilt. Now let me give you a perfect example. We can go back into the scriptures. Now, I'm not going to over-religious you, because when I quote the scriptures, these are scriptures by Steve Shank slightly, so don't be afraid. It's okay. The Savior was dealing with a woman that had been taken in adultery, as it were. And back then, they had the policy of if a woman was taken in adultery, she got the rock pile. Okay? That means they stoned her to death. But anyway.
Terrible.
Yeah, nasty thing.
What about the guy?
He was in the crowd getting ready to throw rocks. Okay? And this was kind of the way those chauvinistic societies worked a little bit. Remind me to tell you about the rule of thumb. It'll work. But anyway.
I will.
So anyway, the Savior comes whipping along, and he says, "What's the deal here?" And he got informed of the situation, and he said, "Okay, I got a deal for you guys." That isn't quite the way he said it. I apologize.
Yes, we're paraphrasing a bit.
Paraphrasing a little bit, yeah.
This is what the Steve Shankisms.
Yeah, this is a Steve Shankism. I got a deal for you. Let he who is without guilt cast the first stone. Then he just knelt down and doodled in the dirt. Didn't mess around with it at all. Just, and he looked up. Everybody was gone. And he said to the woman, "Where are thine accusers?" She said, "Well, they took off." He said, well, I got nothing with you. Just go ahead and don't do it anymore. That was it. Interesting deal. Those who were being judgmental were the guilty ones. They were harboring the guilt in their hearts. And so understand one thing. When someone is angry at you, it's not ever, I understand all of the arguments, it is never about you. It's always about them and how they're feeling about themselves because of you and their judgmentalism of you or how you've made them feel, whatever. But it's always guilt in them. And I can prove it. And I'll prove it over the next few weeks with these programs, and I think it'll be fun because we're going to ask you folks to write in some little commentary or questions or whatever. No negative comments. I won't even read them. But if you got any questions or if you want to challenge some of these philosophies, trust me, I can defend myself. Okay? So anyway.
Well, and you can find Steve on Facebook. So just look for Steve Shank and go ahead and put your comments or questions right there. You'll see this video there.
Yeah, but that's an interesting thing. They call it Facebook, and I'm on Facebook, and obviously everybody out there can see that I've got a face for radio. What am I doing here on Facebook? It's just absolutely insane.
I'm with you on that. You've
You're
been doing
with
radio.
me on my face for radio?
No, I'm
that
with
Hey, can we replace her? This is.
He's going to ask me, wait, you're judging me for your own guilt, right? Is that right? I'm learning something.
That could be it.
Well, let's talk a little bit. The show's coming up. It'll be every week. We're going to learn something. Every week people can write comments. And I think that will be fun, too. The engineer just wrote something sweet, so I had to pause. But I think what the fun thing about the show will be that we'll be able to get to know you. And you have your voice. You brought up radio, having a face for radio, which is something I've been in radio for a long time too. You have been on the George Noory Show, Alex Jones. You've been on national radio, so people have heard you all over. So you probably recognize his voice. You probably heard him before. How's that? That sounds like it's been fun, a blast for you. I've seen some of your interviews. How did you get into radio?
Just like everything else, I live my life by default. What do you think? Just like everybody else out there.
You didn't decide and do it?
It just happened to me. No, there's just some things that needed to be said. We're dealing with freedoms in our country that are being lost. We have the American lifestyle being challenged every day, and things are difficult. We've got huge numbers of people out there that are economically falling behind. 20,000 people a day are falling below the poverty line in America, the richest country in the world. We're in a situation right now where this country that could feed the entire planet 5 times over in 1959 is now importing 40% of its food. We've got people that are hurting. We've got people that don't know the answers, that think that they're being done unto, that they're being made victims of. And the message, along with coming up with some food products that they can put into their homes and that will solve some of their financial problems with food and things like that we do with our company. But along with that, remember I said the 4 parts of a human being are spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. We can take care of the physical part, but you can have the food, you can have the means, but even without those, if you have the hope, You know, they say, and I probably will quote this wrong, just like I do everything else, but it's okay. They say that you can live for a month without food, you know, for 3 days without water, 3 minutes maybe without air, but not 1 second without hope. One of the reasons that the book had to be written is because it's got the answers that I don't know why I was picked to have this stuff dumped on me. I just think differently than everybody else does. I don't know why, but some of these answers people need so desperately to have the hope to go and deal with the mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical stuff. And I can feed people with the company and the great products that we put out, but unless they're fed spiritually, mentally, emotionally, so that they can deal with this. Do you realize that the major ailment of women in America is depression? I mean, it's just unbelievable. And so much of what we're dealing with is the fact that in our society we're plagued with all this guilt and all the woulda, shoulds, and coulds and all this stuff. Let me give you a perfect example that I discovered in the process of writing this book. Everything that we deal with in life is relative to what somebody thinks of us. But the fact is, and how we're evaluated and judged and all this kind of stuff, but everything is about relationships. Take yourself out of this situation. Let's say that you had your own desert island. Okay?
Could be a tropical island.
Yeah, tropical desert island.
Okay.
You got plenty of coconut nuts to eat, and you got some fishes. You got to eat them raw because you haven't figured out fire yet, unless you stole it from somebody before you got to the desert. I won't go into that. But anyway, the fact is that you got your own desert island, okay? You got plenty of food, you got everything that you need, and nobody else. Is there any right and wrong? Is there any good or bad? Is there any beautiful or ugly? Are there any of the dichotomous judgments that we make on ourselves and other individuals all through our lives? Is there any of that? I submit that if nobody knew what I was thinking, that would probably be a good thing most of the time. But anyway, if nobody knew what I was thinking, if nobody knew or could see what I was doing or hear what I said, then there wouldn't be anything to evaluate about my life. I would just be.
There would be no comparison.
I'd eat the coconut. Wouldn't have any moral issues. Wouldn't have any issues at all. And the perfect example is some of the things that I put in the book that are kind of fun. Most people don't realize that there is a tribe, an island tribe, out in the middle of the water. That's what an island is, just for those that didn't know that. But anyway, there's an island tribe that don't mind if their young teenagers and folks who have reached puberty are sexually active. Don't mind at all. They have children and the tribe raises them, and that's a couple now. However, if before they're married, they're caught eating together, oh my gosh, it's an absolute no-no. Can't do that. They're banished from the tribe. Bad deal.
Wow.
And so what do the teenagers there do? They don't sneak around on the back of a Chevy. They sneak out and have McDonald's. I think it's a little different than that. But anyway, okay, let's go to Japan. I have a good friend who spent 10 years in Japan. Okay? Now, he sees women differently than I do. I'm not going to tell you how I see women. I would be in trouble. But be that as it may, he says that one of the sexiest things about Japanese women to him is the nape of the neck. Interesting. Different society, different values. What's beautiful? What's not beautiful? Does it count? Never does. Okay, let's go over to Greece. Helen, wearing her toga, always wore one breast exposed and the other covered up. Now, she had to be very careful. I mean, she had a 50% chance of being right, but she had to. That's the farm boy in me. But anyway, she had to be careful to make sure that the toga covered the correct breast. Because if she didn't, got him confused one day, she was really the talk of the town. And I suspect that there were probably some, I don't know, probably some fanatics about, their pornography was seeing the left breast, I think, probably. Wow. And it's just, that's the society. It was appropriate and not appropriate. What works, what doesn't work. In early England, the fops, the fellows that were wealthy and the aristocracy and the guys that were really the rooty-toot of society, carried snuff boxes. Now this was ground up tobacco that they always carried a handkerchief tucked in their sleeve. Okay, they'd take out their snuff box in polite company, guys, and they'd take a little sniff of this and they go. And it would immediately make them sneeze. They'd pull out the handkerchief and sneeze into the handkerchief and blow their nose. And that was gentlemanly procedure. Around us, we say the guy's a dork. Yeah, he's a dipstick. That's obscene, disgusting. But that was polite society. There was a queen, I think she was in France, that hated taking baths. Absolutely hated taking baths, so she'd just get up and powder herself up every morning and just put on another layer of white powder. And so you had all of these, and of course all of the court had to follow suit, because what the queen does, everybody's got to do. And so you had all these pasty-faced apparitions, running around, not taking baths because that's what the queen did. Can you imagine going to a ball where they were, never mind.
I'm glad that faded out.
Okay. So all I'm saying is those are just kind of some little scenarios about it all comes back to who we are and what we choose to be, and the power that we have as human beings to be creators of our destiny. And that's what we're going to be talking about, which is going to be just fun, because as I learned this stuff the hard way, and I challenge any of you to recognize any of these principles as ever having seen them before. They're different, they're weird, but they work. And so one of the things that Michael in the book is trying to figure out from The Guardian is just how things work. And most people, if you think about it, that's your question. How do things really work? You are a creator. You are powerful. You can create your entire life and environment. And when things bad happen, the interesting thing I mentioned earlier in the show that people don't learn, at least I don't, and I don't think anyone else does, really learn the true lessons of how things work by things going very well. My problem is when things are going well, you're making plenty of money, everything's going cool, I don't think about anything. Why should you change anything? But then when the 2x4 comes across the forehead, it usually comes across this way on me, what happens is that you already get your comeuppance and you say, wait a minute, I got to change something. And then you're forced to think and you're forced to decide. And once you decide, you create, and there you go again. And so we go through these cycles. But there's some interesting principles, and I'll just list a few of them, and we'll go to them in detail on future programs. But one of the most important things, I was talking to, I've got a teenage son, and he's going through all the typical stuff that kids do, and making friends and moving into new schools and whatever kids are dealing with. You've all done it. I did it. Believe it or not, I actually did it. But anyway, and there's a principle. If you think about this, if you want to be liked, understand it's never about you. If you say, those guys don't like me. Okay? They don't like you. No, it's about them. They need somebody to feel superior to. So you have a bully. But the fact is, here's the law, and you can take this to the bank. If you understand this one principle, you'll understand how to be liked, how to get along with your mate, how to resolve problems with any relationship you have, and how to build any relationship you've got. It's a simple principle. If I enable you, Kim, to be able to say, I like me best when I'm around you. So you see, what a lot of people think is that they can aggrandize themselves by saying how wonderful they are. They say, oh, I'm really great. I can shoot baskets. I can run faster. I can talk longer. I can talk longer. But anyway, they brag about themselves. No, you don't get it. If you want someone to like you, you don't brag about yourself, because they're sitting there saying, what about me? I want to talk about me. You know, who's that guy? Toby Keith.
Oh, right.
We can talk about your clothes. We can talk about this. But for a change, I want to talk about me. Everybody wants to talk about them. So if I say, that is a gorgeous necklace. I love your hair. That's a great outfit.
Keep going.
If I could mooch. Anyway. But anyway, if I do everything I can to make you feel good about you, like when you did the introduction, you did that very nicely. You have a nice presence. You're a very attractive woman, and you show very well on TV. And you make...
Not in HD.
But anyway, and so the more you make people feel good about themselves, the better off you are. It goes with husbands and wives. What do people do when they're courting, if you think about it?
How do I love thee? Let me count the ways.
Yes, how do I love thee? Let me count the ways. The guy remembers her birthday, remembers the first date, and has an anniversary of that a month later. The guy actually combs his hair, uses deodorant, brushes his teeth, doesn't wear a wife-beater T-shirt, you know, all these things. All the things that he does a year after they're married, he sits down after dinner, drinks his beer, gets up, belches loudly, and goes to bed.
Didn't do that while courting.
Never would.
Never would have gotten married.
Never would. And so the thing is that what he did was he did everything about her, told her how beautiful she was, how sexy she was, how fun it was to be with her, how enjoyable it was to be seen with her on his arm, how proud he was of her. Is he telling that a year later? Some guys don't make it a month, but be that as it may. And what's she doing? Well, you know, back in my day, they used to have rollers for hair. Girls don't do that anymore. But the ultimate nasty is out shopping at Smith's in bedroom slippers and hair rollers. I mean,
kids wearing jammies all the time, Sam. But yeah,
but don't
do that.
Don't start me on the new generation. If you'll recall, there was a fellow some time ago that said, this new generation is going down the tubes. They have terrible music. They dress terribly. They speak terribly. They're disrespectful. You know who it was? Plato. So every generation we got going down the line.
Nothing's changed. Everything changes. Nothing changes.
Yeah, absolutely nothing's changed. But so the principle, if I'm around you and you make me feel like I like me best when I'm with you, what would happen if every marriage, if every husband, every wife remembered to make their companion be able to say every day, I like me best when I'm with you? It's an interesting principle. We'll go into it in depth. There's some other fun little ones. There's some. One of them is a principle called the super hugger. Okay? The super hugger Everybody needs about 8 hugs a day. It's how they survive. We are gregarious beings. We need other people. One of the biggest failings and problems with cell phones and Facebook and all of this distant friend stuff is we don't have the togetherness, the hug, the closeness, the oneness that we crave desperately. And we try and fill that gap with stuff that's electronics, and it's not working. It's absolutely not working. But
It's helping, but it's not completing people.
it's not completing people. And so here's the principle.
Distance is disaster.
Okay? What happens when two people get sideways with each other? Okay, let's say that you and I had a little bit of a tiff. What is your tendency? What's my tendency? My tendency is to move away. If we were riding in a car, Kim would be on the other side. You couldn't remove her from the door with a spatula from the kitchen. Okay? The fact is that, and if we're not in a car, she's going to be out the door and gone. Because when we get angry, it's about us, remember. We are feeling guilty about being angry, but we want to stay angry. And so the best way to stay angry and remember what you said is to get away. Because if I get too close to you, you're going to start liking me again. Okay? Closeness, like, distance, disaster. So one of the most effective things that people can do if they're having one of these arguments, I don't know how many of you married couples out there have had arguments that after you've kissed and made up, you look back and say, what the heck was that all about? You know, so many of the things, because I'm feeling about me, you're feeling about you, and there the twain shall meet, and so we're fighting in our own little, but we are throwing it at each other, and it makes us feel crappy when we're next to each other. So if I don't like me when I'm next to you, what am I going to do? I'm going to get distance, and that creates disaster. So the most effective thing you can do is just both shut up and give each other a hug.
Well, you know, and I think, Steve, we're almost out of time here, but that would be a great challenge for those of you who will tune in next week and listen or watch or both this broadcast, It's Not Your Fault with Steve Shank. You know, that's a great challenge. Let's try reverse. Instead of distancing, let's try the closeness and being positive and making people feel great when they're with you.
Play with it. You'll like it.
And you can tell, I think it'd be fun, Steve, too. You can tell Steve how you feel about this and what you've done on his Facebook site. And you can go to steveshank.me, his blog as well. And we'll find out more about this food expert, this talk radio and talk show host, and the author of the new book, It's Not Your Fault, by Steve Shank, that is going to be amazing. I have read it. It's powerful. It's changing my life as I bring up the principles. And I hope you will tune in to learn more, too, because you know what? We're so busy that getting nuggets of wisdom from Steve Shank and having a laugh with you, because you've got a great sense of humor, will really help us just to have a moment to say, hey, maybe I can decide to be different.
Good. And the interesting thing is, I think that as we get to know each other, I really am going to like me best when I'm with you.
That's perfect. Again, this is Steve Shank. We are on Utah Valley Live. It's been the first time for Primetime Health's new show called It's Not Your Fault by Steve Shank. Again, you can find him on Facebook, Steve, S-H-E-N-K. You can also find him on steveshank.me. Thank you so much, Steve, for letting me get to interview you on our first show. I'm excited to be a great fan and watch this. Thank you to Utah Valley Live for hosting this show, and for KHQN AM 1480 for being able to tune in. Now, we hope everybody enjoyed the show.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you.